Indigenous Atheists and Agnostics. People who do not know, people have a false assumption that every culture in the world has some belief in a god or a creator god. This is not actually true. There are many instances of indigenous cultures throughout the world that had no concept of a creator god, which there are inherently atheists, agnostics, or at the very least some vague form of deism, but for them they don't need the god, it's just there as a background, filler. Yeah, I'll give you some examples, and then we're gonna read an article about traditional societies, written by a new book called "The Cambridge History of Atheism," where they will say, "Are these indigenous groups actually atheists? Yes and no. Yes, in a sense, they do not believe in the concept of a creator, but no, because they still believe in some supernatural phenomena and gods in a vague sense, like in minor gods and stuff like that. But we talk about atheism as like a creator god, the god who made everything. No, they're an atheist in the absolute. The same thing with Buddhists, and when it comes to a creator god, they're atheists in that question. But they still believe in devas, which are gods, but they're not like all powerful. They're just spirits or humans who achieve higher level, but they're not absolutes. Yeah, give you an example. The all scholars agree that these are the examples of atheists and Gnostics, indigenous cultures that had no concept of religion. Let's start with the Badimo people. The Badimo people are somewhere in southern Africa where they believe in God, but it's a distance. It's distant itself to the world, and God is irrelevant in their day to day life. They have a very atheistic worldview about this God. Well, technically, he does exist, but he left and abandoned it pretty much. And they live their lives without the God, without the need of the help of the supernatural. And the Bantu people in their religious life said there is no creation and the universe is eternal and God did not create it, but instead the God is related to the universe. It's a naturalistic form of pantheism or deism. Again, God did not create anything, and this God is just part of nature and has no relevance in their day to day life. We also had the Pygmy tribes that had no religion, no gods, no rituals, and no concept of the afterlife. This is one of the few examples of indigenous culture that are explicitly atheists. They just bury their dead and move on. The Pygmy people have been around as long as 100,000 years, making it the third or fourth oldest racial slash ethnic slash tribe slash culture in the whole world. We also had the Eskimos, where many tribes in Africa were agnostics when it comes to the existence of gods. Many Native American tribes throughout history have believed in some form of Epicurean form of deism, where God is basically irrelevant and distinct, who will not do anything, will not answer prayer, will not intervene, will not do nothing. We also had the Hadza people of Tanzania, who are atheists, who do not believe in a God. They just do their day-to-day life. We also had the Sandawe people, again in Southern Africa, who for them God is irrelevant in their day-to-day lives. We also had the Abipone people who reject, they're from Argentina. They reject all abstracts, including gods, in their culture. We also have various tribes in the country of the African country of Cameroon who believe in an evil god and they don't want to have any relation with this god and they believe they can live their lives without the supernatural aid. Other tribes in Vedas of Ceylon, also known as Sri Lanka, they don't have a concept of God and are agnostic. One famous report in the book of Will Durant's The History of Civilization is he on a rock? On a white ant hill? On a tree? I never saw a god. Durant also report that a Zulu people, some tribes of Zulu people are also atheists as well. When asked who made and govern things like setting the sun and growing the tree, and the answer, no, we see them, but we cannot tell how they came. We suppose they came by themselves. Another example. We also have another example in a region of Turkey called the Ionians. There's a group of people called the Ionians from Greece and Turkey who don't believe in the concept of God or lack any coherent definition or concept in their day-to-day cultures. They also, the indigenous people in Mexico, the Chichmeca, who, at least in one account, there are some people of the native tribe who do not believe in gods or afterlife. One famous example, when a Spanish monk came to convert them to Christianity, specifically Roman Catholicism, and trying to tell them the story about the afterlife, about Jesus, right? The Chichmeca person, he laughed, and the monk tells him, "What do you think where we end up when we die?" And this anonymous Chichmeca points at the floor. At the end, in one book of the last book of David Graeber produced, The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity, where he noticed that the Enlightenment was started by Native Americans who were doing their own debates about questioning the existence of gods. So it's nothing new per se. We have indigenous culture who are inherently atheists in their concepts, and there are others who are agnostics, and there are others who do believe it, but they don't care about it, or they don't want anything to do with it. Now, there are atheists and agnostics, these cultures, when it comes to a creator. But the article I'm going to read now from the Cambridge History of Atheism, called The Chapter called Traditional Societies, written by Benjamin Grant Bursiski and Richard Sossi, where they're going to about semantic, what defines atheism and theism, although they use the colloquial definition that no philosopher used, which is a lack of belief, which no philosopher actually used for some reason. But regardless. Introduction. Anthropologist Jack Goody noted that both gods and Tao are widespread transversal, if not universal, aspect of culture, the result not an inbuilt process but an interaction between language using human beings and their social and natural environment. There are two important points. Goody conveys first, Tao, that is reluctant or resistant to adult received wisdom. It says in all societies. Second, doubt does not exclusively spring from some internal faculty, but rather is the output of a complex set of input to an organism that produce, manipulate, and transmit ideas. In other words, doubt emerges as a product of systematic process. One implication of this view is that doubt can express differently across contexts. If human, social, and natural environments vary, it follows that doubt is erased from their interactions. Some should exhibit in a corresponding fashion. Here we point the way in which people variously express religious doubts across traditions. Doubt, atheism, non-belief, and non-commitment. We refer to doubt as a motivational force that leads to one to reluctance or resistance to wisdom and practice. If we take Russell's 1961 colloquial distinction as a starting point, atheists accept two propositions. The first, that we can know if God exists, and the second is that we know the point to the lack of existence. Agnostics reject the first proposition, second by implication, positing that there is neither enough reason nor evidence to answer the question. In this view, that agnostic doubt while atheists confidently reject. What brings people to this position, of course, is complicated, particularly if we take Goody's view seriously, just as the process that leads to a rejection of atheism are manifold. The kind of rejection or resistance to religion are multitudinous. There are different shades of non-belief: atheism, agnosticism, apatheism, and the ethnography of doubt or apathy, that will examine how people variously express such states, as we have no prior reason to suggest that a true atheist is one who neither believes nor practices throughout some arbitrary assigned span of time in his or her life, and there are no data on a small-scale society that reliably sample and measure such a position. We focus here on traditional, i.e., pertaining to religion in small-scale societies, ways of expressing doubt and resistance to religious tradition in a variety of ways. Non-commitment, then, we can vary between the include both non-belief, i.e., the mental process involved in assigning true value to something, and non-participation. While doubt may be universal, how ambiguous atheism and skepticism are within and across small-scale societies remain unclear. This stems partly from a lack of data from appropriated samples. Most research on secularization focuses on state-level societies, and most research on religion or its absence on small-scale societies is ancestral and thus lacks precise, comparable measures of commitment. Nevertheless, the ethnographic records make clear that around the world the people express doubt in various ways, in which comes to terms with the presence of ambiguity of doubt in any precise fashion. We need a thorough sense of how people express it and how this expression varies and ways of measuring that variation. Here we restrict our discussion to religious commitment, namely individuals' beliefs about spiritual agents and the behaviors they associate with them, and religious non-commitment. The FOSI have the benefit of avoiding issues of classification social belief systems such as communism as a religion by virtue of its repressive ideological dogma. Similarly, we do not equate religious faith with ultimate concern, thereby consider any target a maximal passion and object of religious devotion. Our focus is on popular belief and practice rather than targeting doctrine. In what follows, then, religious doubt refers to a lack of conviction or sense of uncertainty about spiritual beings and their associated practices. While not crucial to our presentation, we do assume that belief and behavior are dynamic. Behavior can further establish the ideological commitment and can contribute to forging beliefs as well just as much as beliefs can harness the motivation to propel an individual to act. Acknowledging this dynamicism highlights the weakness in some perspective about what it means to be non-religious. One can be ideologically an atheist, for example, but nevertheless a serious devotee practitioner of the morality of behaviors associated with gods. Likewise, one can be firm belief in the existence of gods and spirits, but without participating in any ritual activity or behavior devoted to them. Indeed, anthropologists and social psychologists have recognized that different social groups value belief of religious ideas differently than they value participating in religious practice. Some emphasize ideological consensus, believing the same thing, while others emphasize behavioral consensus with beliefs relatively free to vary. This chapter unfolds as follows. We begin by considering the universality of religion. Various scholars have argued that some traditional societies are devoid of religious commitment or even a system of religion. We contest these claims and look closely at several commonly referenced samples of societies that allegedly lack religion, especially the Hadza and the Piraha. We then consider popular scholarly claims that Buddhism is atheistic. Next, we examine the ethnographic data of society that foster a religious tradition that challenge, subvert, and even resist the religious social order. These religions provide a very different model of religion that is generally familiar among Western society. We conclude with discussion of direction for further research on non-belief and doubt in traditional population. When they mean by Western society, they mean from Western Europe, which is from Spain to France to Germany, the British Isles, and Scandinavia, to North America, Canada, the United States, the Anglo-Saxon white society. How non-religious are traditional societies? Note that no society, not to anthropology or history, is devoid what reasonable observers will agree is religion. Nonetheless, not all scholars agree that there has been a recent influx or repetition of claims about the essence of religion on some facets of religion. In certain traditional societies, these claims address the conceptual and or factual aspects of the matter. In terms of conceptual some scholars simply claim religion particular to only a few societies. For example, doubt that all or even most human societies had a religion in useful sense of the term. Elaborates religion appear with large-scale kingdoms, literacy a state institution. Before them, people had pragmatic cults and ceremonies, the point of which was to extract specific contingencies, misfortune in particular. For Boyer and Sefer, religion appears to be synonymous with spiritual tradition and large-scale social organization and literacy. Despite the very high probability that all societies consist of individuals who hold beliefs about spirits and gods, perform behaviors ought to please them, and avoid or discourage behaviors though to displease them, according to these authors, they does not qualify as a religion or religious. Political and religious leaders, as well as scholars, have also challenged observation asserting that traditional society are religious or have religions. Small-scale society alleged are somehow less religious than large-scale societies. Christopher Columbus, for example, posited that the Canary Islands who become Christians very easily, for it seemed to him they had no religion. A century later, missionaries made similar statements about indigenous Caribbean traditions. One notes that after having lived without any knowledge of God, they died without hope of salvation. It would be better for us to say that we have no religion at all, instead of describing it as a cult of divinity, utter trifling nonsense, superstition, or more exactly sacrilege, which they honor all of the demons who seduce them, are emphasis. Another missionary suggested they do not trouble themselves with knowing what becomes of the soul of the dead, at least we had never been able to turn this information out of them. Note, however, that we really admit of having little experience with the people themselves, and grant that we had his colleagues colleagues might learn if we were to live among them or they among us. In the present time, they will greatly separate us by inaccessible hills, that we see them rarely or only when they come by sea to trade with the French. So, in addition to sheer lack of interaction, missionaries might dismiss what they see as chiefly nonsense, thus minimizing any association with anything heavenly. The assumption or claim that traditional society lack a genuine or full religion had not gone away. For example, some social societies that discuss a contemporary small-scale population made these claims, although they stem from different motivations than earlier observations. Another research similarly characterized traditions such as Buddhism as non-theistic religion, when all evidence points to the contrary. In the remainder of this section, we discuss these examples and tend to some counter evidence to such claims. The Hadza. The Hadza are one of the most extensively studied small-scale populations in the world. Located in Tanzania, some Hadza communities have retained their foraging lifestyles, while others have been incorporated into market economy. But even Hadza foragers are crazily influenced by market economies and tourism, and their territory continues to pressure by neighboring groups. Celebrated ethnographer James Woodburn notes that Hadza link death and burial with their major religious celebrations. The sacred Abipone dance before pitch darkness each month. Failure to hold the dance is believed to be dangerous. Performing the dance is believed to maintain and promote general well-being, above all good health and successful hunting. We wager that these traditions might provide a starting point for elaborating into a systematic belief about fertility and generation in death, but the evidence does not. I take to support the idea that such a systematic belief have already developed. Here, Woodburn suggests a kind of primitive religion that does not quite yet have a degree of formalism in terms of belief, that fully formed traditions would. Following this, anthropologist Frank Marlowe notes that after asking one man if there was only one god or several, he thought about it for a while and then said was not quite sure. This sounds not much about the Hadza religion. However, he continues. I think one can say Hadza to have a religion, certainly a cosmology anyway, but it bears little resemblance to what most of us in complex society, with Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, think as a religion. There are no churches, preachers, leaders, or religious guardians, no idols or images of gods, no regular organized meetings, no religious morality, no belief in the afterlife. There is nothing like a major religion. All the beliefs and rituals associated with bread dance and meat eating are at the heart of Hadza religion. Here, Marlowe simply contrasts the religiosity of the major world tradition with Hadza beliefs and practice, and though most of us complex society know as religion some kind of reliable measuring stick. However, posing a several question about the nature of the Trinity, for instance, to a lay Catholic, is likely to use a similar assertive, if not a similar kind of verbal shrug. In the same spirit, those have characterized the Hadza as being minimally religious and having little belief in omniscient moralizing gods. However, others whose research efforts have focused on, especially on Hadza religion, suggest a rich religious life include multiple rituals, spirits, cosmological beliefs, and practices. The solitary study that collected discrete quantitative data of the topic suggests that the vast majority of sampled Hadza believe in at least two deities. Only two were asked about, however. On the belief, 82% also that said that Hainen, represented by the moon, and Ishoko, represented by the sun, are the same god. Only 7.4% of the sample claim that these gods do not exist, and 5.9% claim do not know if either exists. A total of 85.4% of those who answer number equal 48 claim to engage in rituals devoted to Haine, was virtually the same proportion, 85.7%, n equals 35, report to engage a right devotee to please Ishoko. And the sample n equals 68 refers to I don't know. A more specific look at beliefs suggest that most responses about native deities are merely conceived as a putative moralistic knowledge. Illustrating the distribution of this data, here modal response to both deities are positive for the knowledge and punishment scores, where the more for moral interest questions are positive for Haine, dark gray, but negative for Ishoko, white, and the distribution is roughly uniform across answer opinions. The options, my mistake. Furthermore, there is no reliable indication of the exposure to Christianity in association with such beliefs. As for their Hadza behavior, Emmen and the Maidoko are essentially important. Emmen can refer to ritual individuals who have been successfully initiated to the otherwise secreted rituals, prestigious parts of meat surrounded by with taboos and norms regarding its consumption and a deity. According to one account, individuals can formally express other transgression during a Beme ceremony. Some Apicello informants suggested that Hadza engaged in this tradition for themselves, not a god. Moreover, nothing bad will happen if they do not do the dance. It can be used to bring rain and good fortune, to heal the sick, and to make people happy. However, Scanes details how people dance for spirits, where a dancer communicates for whom he's going to dance. This makes the spirit of the person he dances for enter the body of the dancer through his head, and the dancer becomes a vessel for the spirit and one with whose name has danced. Participation in this ritual requires a certain level of maturity, and there are ritual specialists who exhibit specific behaviors of initiation. Relationship force in the eminent ritual produces sustained cooperation behavior. In summary, then, contrary to some portray Hadza tradition, many of which are conducted in secret, are demographically structured in important ways. They create and maintain relationships and are deeply intertwined with the Hadza cosmos and social order. In other words, the Hadza are indeed a religious society with many indicators of spirit and practices that can foster cooperative relationship and to help maintain their communities. But they, according to the article, they do not believe explicitly of a creator, so they are technically atheists in that sense. The Piraha people of Brazil have gained some notoriety throughout the various efforts of ethno-linguist Daniel. In a chapter entitled Material Culture and the Absence of Ritual, characterized the Piraha as having a relatively lack of ritual, which referred to a set of pre-prescribed actions with symbolic significance for the culture. Even if we maintain average definition, he provides various points of evidence to the contrary. For example, the Piraha make necklaces to ward off spirits and to look more attractive. The Piraha also bury their dead. According to Everett, however, there is little ritual that we can describe with this term, associated with the burials. Yet Everett acknowledged that the Piraha had loosely followed traditions surrounding the burials, sometimes that they are buried in a sitting position with many of their belongings placed beside them, while both of the necklace and burial consist of prescribed actions with symbolic significance for the culture. Everett distanced these practices from ritual. Everett ponders that the activity closest to ritual among the Pirahas is their dancing, which brings the village together. They are often marked by promiscuity, fun, laughing, and merriment. There is also a dance in which live venomous snakes are used. In it, a man dressed up as an evil spirit emerges from the jungle while singing about his lack of fear and dwelling place in the jungle. He then proceeds to throw the snake at the observer, who scrambles away quickly. Everett suggests that such a dance might be classified as a weak form of religion, in the sense they are witnessed and imitate and clearly have value and meaning to the community. Yet Everett also observed that on many rainless nights a high falsetto voice can be heard from the jungle. It is taken by all the Piraha in the village to be a Kayaribigo, or fast-mouthed spirit. The voice gives the villagers suggestions and advice on how to spend the next day or on possible night's dangers. Everett enters the jungle to confront the man doing this, who on the following day denied it, under the assumption of some form of spiritual possession. This description ends with Everett musing very possibly, I thought. Elsewhere, Everett claimed that the Piraha had no creation story or myth. However, there is evidence from ethnographers suggesting there are many stories and characters about mythic time, including rituals conducted under auspicious of spirits in an active shamanic tradition. According to Concalus, the Piraha religious worldview includes a multi-tier cosmology, including an afterlife which spirits compete for the responsibility to appear in a shamanistic ritual for naming people. The Piraha spiritual landscape is full of various spirits and mythical beings. Other sources suggest there are two major festivals that take place and both had the intention of provoking sounds, making a noise sufficient for the demerged Ikagai, dwelling on the second celestial level. The hearer become aware of their existence and the exact place where they are found. The Piraha word that may not be located by Ikagai can be interpreted as a fear of repetition while containing a mythic fragment narrative, the destruction of the world. This destruction was due in the final instant of the fact that Ikagai was unaware where the Piraha were. It was only through the crying of women who were alone and without fire that Ikagai was then able to locate them and start reconstruction of the world. By average 2005 estimation, Concret's work is the most reliable ever done by an anthropologist, but one simply cannot come to the best conclusion about Piraha meanings working through a medium of the very poor Portuguese of Piraha informants. Conclave based much of his research on work with true Piraha informants whose Portuguese was somewhat better than that of the most Piraha. Conclave acknowledged that they had to piece together what he calls cosmology without myths, where the ideas of Piraha about the cosmos gain consistency in his ritual and dreams that are in fact believed to be life experiences. It is this thinking that they elaborate via ritual discourse and treat that would be equivalent if they are myths in other Amazonian cultures. Everett concludes that Piraha are repeatedly back amalgamas of many of the stories they have pieced together over the years from Capocco, ethnically mixed traders who share in the myths that pervade almost all Amazonian societies. These are not indigenous. Here, Everett concludes that they began to learn these myths from outsiders, but the requirement that myths be exclusively indigenous is entirely arbitrary. The Piraha to entertain such stories and have it in such how embedded they are in greater Amazonian tradition. If we focus in belief in spiritual beings and rituals devoted to them, the Piraha are far from non-religious. However, their rituals lives strongly suggest pattern behavior under the influence of spirits, including possession and transformation. These rites are not merely a set of prescribed actions with symbolic significance for the culture as defined by Everett. Rather, they are practices that are clearly linked to influencing spirits. Temporary, in summary, Piraha's true are religious, but again, they do not explicitly claim they believe in gods. Not just the creator god, just spirits, which in most cases are souls of the dead. Small-scale societies lacking moralistic tradition. These examples are not unique. For similar discussion attitude toward the Matic Sanku of Peru, moreover, related debate concerned not whether some small-scale population lack religion, but whether these populations lack some specific component of religion. In fact, one of the more contested current debates of the evolutionary science of religion concerns whether or not small-scale society had moralistic or pro-social religions prior to contact with Abrahamic or other world religious traditions like Hinduism and Buddhism. And one side of the debate suggests that ancestral religion did not have a clear moral dimension. On the other side, reject the idea that gods of small-scale population lack moralistic supernatural punishment. Both draw upon the same cultural work, yet arrive in different conclusions. And we define morality as a norms of pro-social behavior that entail cost or benefit to others. Do traditional religions truly lack a clear moral dimension? Some peoples like Kalahari, which they do believe in gods by the way, are often purported to maintain a religious tradition that lacks morality. Rights that man's wrongdoing against man is not left to not equal Kuana, a deity, punishment, nor is it considered to be his concern. Man corrects on avenge such wrongdoings himself in his social context. The oft-quoted passage portrays the sun as ultimately self-regulated and therefore a punitive moralistic deity is functionally unnecessary. However, there are few comparative lines of evidence that warrant skepticism of this claim as a whole. First, not equal Guana is a report to punish people both directly and indirectly in the same article. Report that this deity can punish people for demonstrating their own dominance, taking honey, and accidentally shoot and eating a game spot that was not equal Guana in disguise. While these might not be constructed as mortal, it is evidence that this god is thought to punish people. Moreover, the sun regularly bleed with this deity to have suffering and to bring food and water to the community. Despite little evidence that Nakuana is explicitly concerned with this kind of moral expectation found in the Abrahamic tradition, he is a dominant agent that commands respect, and there is no reliable evidence behind the speculation of an ethnographer. The question remains open to whether or not dominant powerful deities that are explicitly moralistic are more effective and increasing cooperation to the dominant powerful deity associated with other forms of behavior. The second line of evidence is the fact that other sun spirits are reported as caring about human moral behavior that are intervening in order to seduce and or exacerbate moral relationships, and are subject to a rich body of mythological or mythical morality tales, and are target of rituals conducted in an emotional climate of dense moral interactions, where local conflicts are resolved. These spirits, the Kuawasi, are either the children of the gods or spirits of the deceased sun. During the sun trance dancing ritual, a dancer may prettily address himself to issues of tension in the group and berate individuals of the group collective for their quarreling and urge them to reconcile. In addition to facilitate this intergroup harmony aspect of this tribe also built bridge between camps, and these rituals are thought to be quite effective in healing by non-San. Other South African ethnic groups report one that was attempted by neighboring camps despite the fact there is a major ongoing argument about between the two larger camps over a prospective divorce, the wife coming from one of the camps, the husband from the other. This dispute was at the out, repleted with name-calling and debate between the two camps members. After a while, they agreed to resolve their differences at least for a time. They proceeded to sit together, ultimately laughing and dancing in unison. A son, not only do the San have a very clear moral dimension to their religious tradition, but there is evidence that the tradition can forge beyond the parochial boundaries. Doubt, subverting, and resisting tradition. Despite the question lingering as a result of within the cross-group variant exhibition and ethnographic record, the above examples suggest a long likely the religious tradition, especially traditions that modulate interpersonal and intergroup relationships, are absent from traditional context. In order to reach something more substantial conclusive, we might learn more if we actually examine such questions with field work and listen to what traditional people had to say about such matter. Nevertheless, as Goody suggests, doubt and resistance remain equally universal. What varies across groups is how people express doubt and resistance to tradition. In what follows, we examine evidence of resistance to religion on small-scale societies in an ethnographic record. Asante witchcraft. Consider, for instance, Ivan Pitchford's observation of the Asante, where skepticism toward witch doctor was quite common. Absence of formal coited doctrine permit Asante to state that many, even most, witch doctors are fraud. Faith and skepticism are like traditional. Resonating with Goody's sentiment, every preacher find the commitment and reject the coexist, but in curious way, the Asante did not reject witchcraft in total. Quite the contrary, while the Asante were aware of the ritualized sleight of hand and therefore skeptical about the ability of many witch doctors, they nevertheless believe in witchcraft. It's because 90% of the time these doctors are fraud, so they know which ones are legit, which ones are not. Much like popular notions of luck, what help maintain witchcraft belief in the vicissitude of life, general misfortune and illness coupled with evident strife that comes with being a hypersocial animal provides enough evidence of witchcraft, yet few if any Asante claim to know precisely how witchcraft works. They just know that ill will between people can cause misfortune and illness, and that witchcraft is made possible by specific fluid in witches' bodies. The Asante can see this fluid only upon an individual's death during the process of the body of the deceased, thus prolonging the possibility of the evidence of being a witch. Avid preachers know that upon asking an Asante if were a witch, he will not respond with righteous indignation like he might as if were a thief or a murderer. Instead, an Asante might express hope that it is him who is causing misfortune to others, and might point to like evidence of the witchcraft fluid in his deceased ancestors. When witchcraft becomes especially troubling for it is always afoot, rather than confidently takes matters into their own hands, people consult a variety of oracle devices to provide hints into a social witchcraft. Someone they might make a public appeal, knowing that articles inform them who the social witchcraft was. They do not publicly state who is out of courtesy. They hope they will reciprocate with the witch. When the alleged is confronted with typical apologize, express that if it's a witch, it does not mean to intentionally cause harm and process the ritualistic cool and any witchcraft fluid inside of him. Despite widespread belief in tradition, it remains saturated with the acknowledgement of ignorance and suspicion of ritual experts. Ilahita Arapech. Like the Asante, the Ilahita Arapech of Papua New Guinea advised the curious coexistence of commitment and rejection of supernatural realm. In the series of extraordinary ethnography, Donald described the Tamparan, a secret male cult of the Ilahita and other Arapche communities. The Tampara consists of brutal 5-stage male initial rites, lavish male feasts, and various sacrifices to the spirits. For Ilahita males, the Tampara is a total way of life. The Tampara cult terrorized both women and young male initiates and often denied them much needed food, especially meat. Tunis documented that the men were fully aware that the Tampara was a fiction and his spirits were not real. Indeed, the men expressed considerable guilt and remorse about deceiving the women. Husbands, to alleviate their guilt, will often secretly provide their wives with meat that would have been offered to the Tampara spirits, telling their wives that the spirits are no longer hungry. The Tampara code was ultimately dismantled by the Ilahita. Especially the man publicly admitted that the woman and the Tampara spirits were not real, and the entire code had been elaborate deception. Given the misogynistic inclination of the Tampara, the man feared the woman's response, but the response they received was more surprising than anything they had imagined. The woman claimed they were well aware that the Tampara had always been a hoax, yet they play along to satisfy the man. Thus, we are presented with a remarkable spectacle, a religious system which all those parties involved seem to understand is a fabrication. However, the situation was not so simple. As Tunit described, the man's confession also carried a warning, which was that in a truer sense the Tampara was not a hoax at all. The spirit's variant in the code was and is real. Its power was lethal in the past and it could kill again. The death of the Tampara was partially fueled by a revivalist movement whose Christian belief and doctrine ultimately recorded Ilahita's lives. The revivalists did not claim that the Tampara spirits were not real, rather they were depicted as quite real but satanic. As often the case, religion created the problem and offered the solution. Jesus was superior and would protect the Ilahita from Tampara's demonic spirits. Clowns, tricksters, fools, and the festival. Many traditions around the world incorporate a certain level of tolerance for rejection, if not outright desecration, and their own values and customs in the form of mythical tricksters, sacred clowns, and festivals of disorders. In myth, tricksters are clever but foolish taboo-breaking but likable anti-heroes who are typically responsible for the creation of humans and their more important cultural developments like language, hunting, technology, and ritual traditions. In practice, ritual clowns disrupt sacred ceremonies, defile sacred artifacts, violate norms, and generally represent agents of chaos and disorder. Among the Mexican Mayo, for example, clown behavior involves a fascination with oral behavior, eating breath, feces, etc., with anal behavior, with goosing or jabbing other clowns in the anus with a defecation about sacred objects. Throughout Polynesia, ritual clowns traditionally ridicule chiefs and ritual specialists with impunity. Many Native American tribes include clowns who disrupt ritual orders, perform rituals in reverse fashion, and adopt contrary lifestyles in everyday life as part of their sacred roles. As tricksters write of the Native Americans of Highland Chiapas, although they do distinguish between sacred and profane acts and have a clear sense what is sacred and what is not, this distinction is not equivalent to the distinction between the solemn and the comic, as is often the case in our own society. Those human religious rituals need not be mutually exclusive with respect to setting. In similar way, many festivals celebrate disorder, indulgence, and rejection of normalcy. The Western European Feast of Fools consists of chaotic church masses replicated with cross-dressing, singing obscene songs, eating blood sausages, and gambling at the altar, and throwing out animal excrements at the passers-by. Writing about coercive quality that humor had a hierarchy of medieval Europe, writes that laughter makes no exception for the upper strata, but indeed is usually directed towards it. One might say that it builds its own world versus the official world, its own church versus the official church, its own state versus the official state. Laughter has an indissoluble and essential relation to freedom. The fact that there was a persistent and deeply historical repression of humor in the Western religious tradition suggests that even powerful can fear mirth. Such figures and events may reinforce and adhere to the very norms they violate, or convenient normalcy may reinforce in the importance of rebellion. They are demonstrating how not to behave normally. The exhibit or our exhibition is excess, gluttony, indulgence, sexual freedom, and the violations of general expectations. However, clowns and tricksters who have license to be critical, otherwise infallible, to the point of folly in taking things and people, including oneself, too seriously, many function more to equalize others and humanize those in power rather than reform their roles. And these figures and events represent novelty, creation, and evolution that are widely recognized as catalysts for change rather than maintainers of status quo. Future Horizon in the Study of Traditional Non-Belief. In this chapter, we discuss the question of religious non-commitment among society that largely fall outside the common sampling schemes among social scientists. We argue the contrary to long-standing narrative that remains no society that lacks religion, even the prototypical example of non- or minimal religious societies or atheistic traditions show the contrary. When we should previous target inquiry over casual observation, it is clear that society has separate forms of religiosity. We also discuss some way in which people rarely express doubt itself is resisted tradition, showing that the two to be go hand in hand. Resistance and doubt in traditional society recently has some room for further inquiry. In fact, we think there is no exaggeration to just about every aspect of social science of non-belief in traditional society needs more attention. It is to be of use to understand the human experience, while ignorance, doubt, and apathy are ambiguous atheism and agnosticism form identities, are not likely to present among traditional societies. Atheism as an organizational identity probably exists primarily as a response to and therefore in competition with deism. In traditional society primarily emphasize behavior over ideological commitment. Atheism is not likely to arise if people are already relatively apathetic about believing in the existence of gods. Rather, insensitive and ideological motivation in the context of competition are likely to contribute to the rise of atheism or non-commitment. Take, for example, an ethnographic case study of atheism in India. In response to the religious tradition of cremation at expense of mortuary rites, including the feeding of upper-caste Brahmins, atheists have organized donation their bodies to science and rhetorically packaged donation with signals of how much virtuous senseless the act is in comparison to religious alternatives. Moreover, when benefits from a secular source outweigh those from religious source, we should expect a reduction in religious commitment unless religious systems accumulate to the noble conditions. Among the Zulu of Ecuador, access to secular medicine appears to be a decreased likelihood of soliciting shamans as a first choice of healthcare. Additional cross-cultural work is needed to explore the impact of secular medicine on traditional healing practices, with particular focus on impact the reliance on secular medicine has on religious belief and practice. Future work might also assess the ambiguity of religious non-commitment in traditional societies. Despite sophisticated work-coordinated survey apparatus, we barely have reliable data of belief in state-level society, let alone traditional population. Recent attempts use clever methods to accommodate the more reliable estimates at the prevalence of atheists in the United States, where among doubt is relatively taboo. But how useful this method will be in traditional context remains unexamined. Research will also need to ensure that such measure of commitment reliably account for variation in how people express lack of commitment. If the target inference is individual level general non-religiousness, one must take any taboos or restriction into account. Otherwise, it may be incorrectly assumed that people are committed to particular spirits or lack of religion entirely. In other words, having a better grasp of religion's landscape and community is necessary to access how communities vary. Many reasons bound as to why one could spread non-belief in gods, ranging from taboo, irrelevance, competition, religious market, actual non-belief. This compliance, the ability to obtain accurate estimates on non-belief across population and tradition within those populations. I.e., people might secretly do not believe in God, but have unshakable faith in the existence of ghosts. Yet, to the advanced study of non-belief in traditional society, such information is essential. We are hopeful that carefully created ethnographic work can begin to provide apparatus data. Like I said, although they make statements, they were right and wrong with this statement. Many scholars point out that yes, these individuals are atheists because they do not believe in gods or creator gods, but most of them believe in spirits. Spirits and God are not the same. There is a clear distinction that many cultures are trying to point. And the ones that do believe in God, they're not creator gods. They're just minor deity, or they're part of the already existing world with little relevance in their day-to-day life. The example that I mentioned earlier. And the Piraha people, they never made a clear statement about the existence of God. In many cases, by people trying to convert them, they straight up said there are no gods in many cases. So it is true and false. And also is another example of anarchism, because throughout history, 95% of human history, many indigenous people live in anarchist communist society. And even today, the 200,000 people in the world who still live under hunter-gatherer society are anarchist communists, like the San people. It shows you that people can live in a harmonious society without need of centralized power, political nor religious.